here we are again, back for another MacGuffin video review. This time I'm joined by Alan.
Hello.
As always, I'm Spencer, and today we're going to be talking Cars 2. Alan and I were lucky enough to go to an advanced screening of Cars 2. Where to begin? This is the first non-Toy Story sequel, as John and I talked about in our last episode of the podcast. How do you feel like they did?
Well, thinking about it. Okay, well, first off, when we talk about Cars 2, I have to talk a little bit about Cars.
Absolutely.
I watched your guys' last podcast, and I think a lot of what you guys said about the first Cars, I agreed with, about how it's not really my favorite of the Pixar films. It's probably my least favorite out of all of them. I thought the story was, it was enjoyable, but it was kind of generic.
It's funny because somebody, I don't remember exactly who made the comparison, but it is basically Doc Hollywood. Like, that really is what the story is.
Right.
And it's a fine story, but it's not like anything you haven't seen. Fish Out of Water really is a pretty classic trope.
Yeah, it felt like it was really sort of geared more towards children. It didn't have that sort of emotional impact that, the last outings that Pixar has done has really done well.
Yeah.
So going into Cars 2, I was a little hesitant that, it wouldn't live up to the standard that they've set the last couple of years. And
it's a high bar.
Yeah, so, after watching it, I didn't hate the movie at all. I thought it was really, really enjoyable. However, a lot of the things that we've said about the first Cars does apply to Cars 2.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, and I told you this when we left, like, if they had done Cars 2 as the first Cars, like, the first Cars didn't exist and this was the first creation, I think I would have enjoyed it more. Because I think, those preconceptions of Cars going in definitely weighed on me a little bit while watching the movie. I think this film is better than Cars. Let's get that off.
I think it's a step up from Cars, for sure.
It's definitely a much more interesting story. It's definitely more creative in terms of comparison to the original Cars, but at the same time I agree a lot of those same issues exist for me, and some of them aren't even necessarily connected to the original Cars being too kiddie and all that sort of stuff. For instance, I just don't really like Larry the Cable Guy.
That was definitely one of the issues about this film, because if I remember correctly, because it's been a while since I last saw Cars, Larry the Cable Guy's character, Mater, he was sort of a side character, right? Like a supporting character?
Yeah, he was pretty central, I would say. In the first one, there was the relationship between Owen Wilson and Bonnie Hunt, sort of the boy meets girl kind of thing. But at the same time, the Mater and Lightning McQueen relationship was still pretty big. Their friendship, how that blossomed or whatever, was still a pretty significant portion of it. Yeah. But this takes that even further.
This time, for me, I thought the Mater character was brought to the forefront as the actual lead character.
No, I agree.
And, I agree with you about Larry the Cable Guy. I'm kind of, not into the whole, dumb redneck shtick he has going on. No offense to the dumb rednecks out there. But, it's hard to hear his voice and not picture that guy.
And you're right. He definitely steps to the forefront in this movie as his character. We can give a basic idea. The story takes Lightning McQueen and Mater on a round-the-world Grand Prix journey. There's a race that's been created to sort of prove that this alternative fuel is better than regular oil. And so, as part of this Grand Prix, they get Lightning McQueen involved, and he then brings Mater on it.
Right.
And during that process, Mater is mistaken for an American spy.
Right.
And, antics ensue on both sort of levels. But that spy storyline sort of is the main storyline of the movie.
Yeah, I actually really kind of enjoyed the spy aspect of the film. I thought that beginning scene, I forgot where it was at the oil rig out in the water. I thought that was pretty exciting.
I think both of the characters that they brought on as sort of the spy side of things. Michael Caine as Finn McMissile and Emily Mortimer as Holly Shiftwell, which is a great Bond name.
Yeah, that is a great Bond name.
Both of them were great, and I thought they both interacted well with, Larry the Cable Guy, but ultimately sort of that Larry the Cable Guy shtick ultimately is sort of what comes through.
Yeah, it was a little, it was a little much for me. It seemed like every line that Mater gave out was sort of like a joke or or some sort of shtick about the whole thing. His relationship with Lightning felt very, I don't know, I would say kind of how do you say it? Like TV-esque, like it was from a TV show.
Yeah, I mean the
sitcom.
I mean, I talk about the trope of boy meets girl sort of being the original Cars. This one sort of is a kind of classic trope as well, though, in the sense of that like two friends get pulled apart and then come back together. I mean, it's not really that creative for that storyline. The spy storyline was much more interesting and creative, so that wasn't as nearly as well developed. I will give a shout out though. The American Spy who Larry the Cable Guy is mistaken with, played by Bruce Campbell or voiced by Bruce Campbell. Yeah. So that was pretty. That was a fun little 30-second spot.
30-second scene in the bathroom.
But I mean, I think the around the world sort of aspect of it, like the recreation of sort of the Japanese culture. In the movie
not only
really
Japan,
funny.
but also like
Italy,
Paris. And London. I thought that was all great. It was rendered really, really spectacularly, I thought. Yeah, I mean,
I thought I thought Eddie Izzard was a really good addition to the movie as sort of the guy backing all the races. He was sort of like
kind of put it all together.
Yes, he's an industrialist who then moved from like oil to natural fuels, and he's sort of funding these races to sort of prove it's just as good. He played kind of an interesting character. Granted, his storyline kind of ended up being a little predictable for me. But I still like him as a voice actor for the film.
What did you think about what they did with Lightning's character? For me, it felt like his character was really brought back. He was kind of more of like a supporting character to Mater, and really he spends most of the movie not knowing exactly what's going on. I mean, he's just there to race, and I don't feel like they really brought his character up, developed it as much as they could have.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about this when we talked about Cars 2 in general. It's sort of like, I don't really know where you'd go with the story. It felt kind of wrapped up at the end of the first one, so sort of like, I don't know what more you could do to develop Lightning McQueen, sort of. I mean, I guess if you're really creative, they could have come up with something for him, but yeah, I mean, I feel like he was very much a supporting role in this film, and yeah, you're right, he really is kind of oblivious to most of what's going on.
And I mean, you could say that about a lot of the characters that returned from the original Cars. Like there's the Bonnie Hunt character,
very brief in it though,
who pretty much bookends the entire movie. I mean, she's nowhere else in the middle.
Some of the, I mean, granted some of them are sort of still 2D characters, but like Tony Shalhoub as Luigi, was still really funny. And he kind of is popping up throughout the movie. He travels with Lightning McQueen and Mater, and he sort of keeps making sort of like the comic relief moments throughout the movie. So I liked him.
Yeah, I did think that a lot of the comic relief characters did a really good job. I mean, even with Mater, I mean, he's kind of like an issue with me, but I mean, he does bring out a lot of laughs, I think.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it was mostly his experiences as they travel around the world and these different cultures, and his inability to sort of like again, it's sort of, if you think about it, though, it sort of harkens back to that fish out of water sort of world that the first Cars was sort of built upon. Granted, it changes who's the fish out of water, but it's still sort of dependent upon that trope in some ways. I thought some of the car characters that they created for this film were funny. Like was it Brent Mustangburger? Brent Musburger playing Brent Mustangburger, I thought was pretty funny.
That was pretty funny.
Daryl Waltrip as Daryl Cartrip. I think there's some good puns throughout the story.
Nice little play words going on. Yeah, it was fun.
And I was trying to think about this while I was watching. There's a lot of action in this movie. I mean, I'm trying to think back sort of what other films besides maybe like The Incredibles were on the same sort of level in terms of action as this movie. That's the only one I could really think of.
Yeah, The Incredibles definitely. I mean, this film is really action heavy. I mean, right from the get-go, like I said, I mentioned earlier, there's that action scene. And then, I mean, not only do you have all the action scenes amongst like the spy elements, you also have, the racing that obviously is there. So, I mean, it's just a mishmash of all these things going on, and I thought they did pretty well with that.
I think it's kind of an interesting thing. One thing we should talk about is this is actually John Lasseter finally being hands-on on a project. He directed this one, co-directed with Brad Lewis. The thing that's interesting though is now John Lasseter has been promoted to the chief creative officer at Pixar and Walt Disney Animation.
Yeah,
So
he
he's
has a hand in
producing
everything.
a
Yeah.
lot of films. He's produced Winnie the Pooh this year. He did Tangled last year.
Mm-hmm.
He was a producer / writer on Toy Story 3.
Wow, how does that guy sleep?
Yeah, I mean, he's really, really busy, but this is
Yeah.
the first film he's like actually directed in a while. And it's kind of interesting. Brad Lewis is a guy who's got a moderate amount of stuff on his track record. He was a producer on Ratatouille. He, interestingly, was a producer on Ants.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
coming from the competition, I guess.
Interesting, yeah. Let's
and
talk
he
about it.
was a producer on Broken Arrow. So really a weird collection
Yeah.
of films that the guy's been involved with. So I'm curious to see where he evolves. Like Lee Unkrich was a co-director there at before becoming the director of Toy Story 3. So I guess Brad Lewis might be one to pay attention to going
most
forward.
definitely. Yeah, you guys definitely talked about this in the last podcast episode.
And the other interesting one is Ben Queen was one of the guys who wrote the guy who wrote the screenplay based on a story by John Lasseter, Brad Lewis, and Dan Fogelman. And Ben Queen, honestly, like really not a lot.
Really?
He's got a film called Nice coming out in 2013. Don't know much about it. He worked on a film called Proximity in 2001, and the only other thing I could really find was he was a writer for the TV series Drive. That
Really?
was
Oh, yeah.
Nathan Fillion film or series that was a couple years back,
Yeah.
and that's really it. I mean, it's really weird to think about.
Wow, Lasseter's definitely putting a lot of faith into these guys who
Yeah.
don't really seem that prudent.
Totally.
But, I mean,
And not only that, but it was funny because John talked about Cars being one of the most successful franchises for Pixar. And I actually went and looked it up, and that's not actually true. Cars
you were
is
wrong.
number 7 of 11 films. So it's the bottom half. The only films, and this is actually kind of kills me, it's right above Wally, which
Really?
makes me sad.
Wow.
And it made $244 million domestically. And that's surprisingly low. I guess it also beat Ratatouille, and it is just above Toy Story and A Bug's Life.
Wow,
It's
that's
it's
interesting.
really middle of the road in terms of their success, and I don't know what that means in terms of what to predict for Cars 2. I suspect it'll be successful.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean,
But-
it's Pixar. It has that name attached to it.
I don't know if it's going to be necessarily as big as something like Toy Story 3 was, or even Up a couple
Yeah.
years back, or
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to expect. It was below Monsters Inc. I was surprised to learn, and Toy Story 3 or Toy Story 2. Both of those were above it in terms of their box office.
Wow. Yeah, with something like Cars, it's really hard to predict. Like, I mean, how much of an appeal did the first one have that came along to this one? I mean, how many new viewers can they pick up? I mean, I don't. It's really interesting. So.
And I think the thing that inevitably we also have to mention is one of the things that occurred to me while seeing this is that odds are the winner of the best animated feature is going to be either this or probably Kung Fu Panda 2.
Yeah.
And so you went to the trouble of actually going out to see Kung Fu Panda 2 immediately after watching Cars 2. I've already seen Kung Fu Panda 2. How do you think, they compare?
Well, I mean, okay, so let's not take into account like other films like Rango that came out. And
I mean,
everything else.
granted, Rio made $460 million, so maybe that's a dark horse. And we could talk about that in a second, but Kung Fu Panda.
I think, okay, so for me, this is the second year in a row where I found that the DreamWorks film was actually better than
with
the
How to Train Your
Pixar.
Dragon.
How to Train Your
I
Dragon.
agree with you about that.
Yeah, I really liked Kung Fu Panda 2. I liked it more than this one. I really liked how they developed the Poe character in that, giving his background and where he came from and everything. I liked the action in the film. And I just thought the emotion that they put into Kung Fu Panda 2 just hit me just a lot more than they did with Cars 2. I mean, does that mean it's going to win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature? I don't know, but I mean, that's my opinion. I really like Kung Fu Panda.
I thought it was enjoyable. I personally thought it was a little bit more shallow. I mean, it sort of expanded on the Poe character, but everyone else, really, there's nothing to. For pretty much the entire movie. You learn nothing about anyone else in that movie besides Poe, which... I mean,
It's kind of the same criticism that you give for Cars 2. I mean,
Yeah.
what else can you do with the supporting characters, right? In Kung Fu Panda?
I think maybe we should expand them. I think, you've got this Fury, or was it the Fierce Five, whatever.
Yeah,
whatever they are.
Yeah.
And I feel like we didn't really learn a heck of a lot about them from the first film, and we didn't really learn anything more in this film. And it's sort of like, that's sort of a group I'd like to know more about as well. So I don't know if you need to spin that off from Kung Fu Panda into its own film or something, but...
Or maybe they save that for a third film.
But they already... I mean, if you saw the 2, you know where they're clearly going with 3.
Exactly.
And it's kind of a cheap end, honestly, I thought, to be like, everything we told you in number 2 really isn't true.
Yeah,
it's sort of like kind of a cop-out, if you ask me.
A little bit. I mean, they try to throw you for a surprise at the end of that one, but I mean, everything that led up to that, I thought
the action was very good. I thought there were some interesting cameos with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Danny McBride was in it. There are a few of them. I feel like there's just too many characters, though, they also introduce in that movie. Like, I feel like it's kind of getting spread a little thin.
It's getting a little big.
But yeah, I don't know. I think it was a very enjoyable film. I think I probably enjoyed it more competitive for me compared to Wally. I personally thought Wally was way better than Kung Fu Panda 2, Kung Fu Panda.
Oh, okay.
And I thought Kung Fu Panda was enjoyable, but I thought Wally was like one of the best films of the decade, whereas Kung Fu Panda was one of the best films of the year. So comparatively, I really liked Wally. Whereas these two ones, I feel
they're
like
a little more on an even
really
plane,
exactly. They're more on an even plane. I think. I'm just not sold on the idea of Cars 2 as a sequel, ultimately. And I think that weighs on me more, whereas I wasn't necessarily as invested in Kung Fu Panda. Sort of like, whatever, if you want to make a sequel to it, make a sequel to it.
Well, how do you think? I mean, when it comes to the Oscar, do you think that Cars 2 is going to take the Oscar this year? Or do you think Kung Fu Panda 2 will?
I don't know. I think it depends on how successful Cars 2 ends up being. Kung Fu Panda 2 has made $400 million already worldwide.
Yeah.
Cars 2, we don't know since it hasn't come out yet. I suspect, since the first one only made 244, that it will probably be slightly above that, probably comparable, maybe 300, 325. And that was domestic. We should say that was domestic. It made 244. So I'm thinking 300, 325 or something domestically. I don't think Cars is a beloved franchise like some of the other Pixar ones are. Yeah. I could see Kung Fu Panda 2 beating it, honestly, because of that. Wall-E was so original, so creative. Up, again, so original, so creative. And Toy Story was even just more beloved than How to Train Your Dragon, so it overwhelmed how creative that was.
Yeah, it was already
so this might be their opportunity. That being said, I can't rule out a dark horse like Rio, which has made $460 million. And I know virtually nothing about it, except after looking up that it was directed by the same guy who did Ice Age 1 and 2. So maybe this is, I think it's Fox who did that. Okay. Maybe this is sort of the dawn of Fox's animation department. I don't know. And the other dark horse, I would say, is Rango.
Which has got some good reviews.
It's gotten mixed reviews. I know some people loved it, some people hated it, but it's only made $240 million worldwide, and I think it might just end up being overlooked. I think ultimately it'll be between Kung Fu Panda 2 and Cars 2, and I think I gotta give the nod to Kung Fu Panda 2, honestly.
At this point, I definitely think.
Unless, some other dark horse that comes out in the fall.
Yeah, I mean, like when you think about Pixar and what they've done, I mean, in the last 4 films they've done, which was Ratatouille, Wall-E, Up, and Toy Story 3. I mean, each of those are great films. Each of them are probably the best films of that year. So when you think about Cars 2. I feel it's definitely a step down from what they've been doing. I mean, it feels like a film that should have came out in 2005, 2006.
Make an interesting point, though, because Ratatouille, as I said, Ratatouille was I believe, let me check, the third lowest grossing film of Pixar. It only made a scotch over 200 million domestically. So I believe that, and I believe that one won Best Animated Film of its year. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it did.
Yeah.
And if that one could do it, maybe that's hope for Cars 2.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some nice depth to Cars 2. It's got some pull with that Mater McQueen relationship, even though it's sort of more predictable, but it's also got more depth and sort of like Larry the Cable Guy Mater sort of coming to terms with who he is in the world, and sort of it's got some more depth. I think there's a little bit of depth to Kung Fu Panda 2, but as I say, I think it's a little bit more spread out.
Yeah, it's more spread out, but I do feel that the development of the Poe character is really what made that film for me.
Well, if that doesn't make the film for you, there's really not a lot else. So, I mean, ultimately, I guess, what's your final grade on Cars 2?
Cars 2, I would probably give it a solid B. I think, if you were going to bring your kids to this film, I think they're going to have a wonderful time. The animation, of course, is always great. The action, really, really good. It's definitely funny, but it doesn't have that spark that I've seen from Pixar in the last couple of years. So
Sure. What about Kung Fu Panda 2? Where do you come down there?
Kung Fu Panda 2, I would give it maybe I'd say B+, like a strong B+.
I honestly, I mean, it's hard. It's gonna have to be like Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
For me, I would say Cars 2 ultimately is a B+, somewhere in that range. I feel like it's much more geared towards kids than a lot of the other Pixar films. The animation is impeccable. The teaser for Brave that is gonna be attached to it.
Oh yeah.
Is very intriguing, so I'm looking forward to that. And the Toy Story short that's attached to it is very fun.
Yeah.
So that might raise it even to an A- in terms of the entire package.
The entire experience of watching
but the film itself is a B+, and Kung Fu Panda 2 is just a straight up B+ for me.
B+. Okay.
Yeah. So Cars B+, Kung Fu Panda 2 B+. So they're very
pretty close.
Pretty close. Yeah. Slight edge to Kung Fu Panda 2.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much like on the same level when it comes to both of those films. So.
And I just ultimately I'm not sold on the sequel to Cars 2 or sequel to Cars.
This whole trend that Pixar is going towards with the whole sequel thing. I mean, I guess they're doing Monsters
University,
Monsters University, and I don't know. I mean, of all the films, I mean, why Cars 2? Like, why did Cars 2 have to be the one? I mean,
it's because John Lasseter loves it. That's the bottom line.
He loves it for some reason.
And so. Go see it. I mean, Pixar definitely is a company that you want to give your money towards. It's an enjoyable film.
It's quality.
It's not going to be Wall-E, but it's still entertaining. As I said, it's better than Cars. And if Cars didn't exist, I'd probably have a much more favorable opinion of the franchise.
Definitely, yeah.
So go see it, check it out, and let us know what you think of it after you do at MacGuffinPodcast.com. I'm definitely curious if we're the minority, we're part of the majority, where other people come down on it.
Yeah.
So let us know.
See ya.